2020 was a dumpster fire. It's not a controversial opinion, and I don't think anyone on the internet is gonna argue with me about it. Anyways, with all that being said, let's just leave it behind. If you're watching this video, welcome to the channel. My name is Lassika from CeeDrawsCars, where I draw cars and talk about them, or draw a car and talk about the topic pertaining to cars. It's a pretty simple channel, really. And today I wanted to talk about a single car that I really fell head over heels for in the past few weeks. It's a car that was created by none other than the legendary Carroll Shelby. Now, some of you might know Carroll Shelby by the role he played in the 2019 epic Ford v Ferrari. My name is Carroll Shelby, and I build race cars. Well, that wasn't Carroll Shelby. That was simply Matt Damon playing Carroll Shelby. I don't know why they picked him, because he looks nothing like Carroll Shelby. However, it was a good flick, all things considered, and it was a good tribute to Ken Miles as well. However, the point of this video is Carroll Shelby's reputation and legacy is far more expansive than the Ford GT40. In fact, the Ford GT40 might be his most celebrated and famous project, which is why they made a movie out of it, obviously. But his legacy spans as far and as wide as the Texan landscape he was born into, and the car that arguably started it is the Shelby Cobra, which will be the topic of this video. The Shelby Cobra, not to be confused with the Mustang Shelby Cobra. Even though those two have the same name, they're completely different beasts. Anyways, without any further ado, let's begin. The Shelby Cobra story begins not in the US, or with Shelby for that matter, but in the United Kingdom in post-war Britain. It started with the AC Ace, a British roadster built in the 1950s. These little sports cars were engineered by John Tohero, a formidable man in his own right, and he helped revolutionize sports car design in the 50s and the 60s. In fact, he was actually one of the first people to design a mid-engine car for better weight distribution, although the engine was in the front. Lamborghini would later make a mid-engine car, but put the engine more towards the rear, hence the Lamborghini Miura being called the first true mid-engine car. John Tohero sold his design to AC Cars in the 50s, and AC, for those of you not in the know, obviously, which is most of you, AC Cars is a small manufacturer out of Britain that surprisingly still exists today. However, AC sold the new design as the AC Ace and offered straight 6 engines from their own company, which were quite small. But they later introduced larger units from Bristol and Ford, all of them straight 6 or inline 6 engines. Here's where Carroll Shelby comes in. In fact, Carroll Shelby was a formidable racer. He made a name for himself in the endurance racing scene with Aston Martin, and he set a lot of speed records. However, he had a heart condition that prevented him from racing in his later years, so he dropped it. But the man is worth his salt in the racing scene. Anyways, let's continue with the story. In 1962, Carroll Shelby saw these Bristol engine Aces racing in America, and being the motorhead he was, convinced AC that all he needed to create his Ace of Spades was their car, albeit with a bigger engine, since the engine bay was actually big enough to accommodate it. He first approached Chevrolet, but they turned him down because they didn't want a competitor to the Corvette. You see, at the time, GM was pretty pedantic about having the fastest car in their lineup be the Corvette. You see, the Corvette was supposed to be their flagship model, the fastest car they ever offered to the public, and having a car with a similar engine that would compete with it directly when it comes to speed and performance wouldn't sit well with the marketing board, or with the rest of the board for that matter, simply because it would take sales away from the Corvette, and of course GM didn't want that. In fact, in the 1980s, when the Buick GNX came out, or Grand National Experimental came out, it was the fastest accelerating car in the world at the time. And and it was advertised as having 276 horsepower. However, independent sources claimed, after dyno testing, that the car made well over 300 horsepower, and they suspect that the horsepower numbers were botched a little bit, just so that the Buick GNX wouldn't look more powerful than the Corvette. Just something to think about. Anyways, after being declined by Chevrolet, Carroll Shelby went to Ford asking for an engine, and since they wanted a car that could compete with the Corvette, they willingly gave him one, and hence, or thus, the legacy of Carroll Shelby as a tuning legend was born. Speaking of engines, there were 3 engines used in the Cobra. The Mach 1 Cobra had the 260 cubic inch 4.3 liter Windsor V8 from a period Ford Falcon or Mustang, but it was tuned and upgraded for better performance. The Cobra Mark II had the 289 cubic inch or 4.7 liter high performance variant of the Windsor engine, and the Mark III had that engine along with the Big Daddy engine of the Ford Motor Company, the 427 cubic inch or the Big 7.0. It was most notably used in the Ford GT40 that dominated Le Mans 4 times in a row, depicted in the film Ford v Ferrari. Now on to performance figures. Performance figures for the Shelby Cobra vary widely between magazines and testers who tested the car. One reason was because each car or each Cobra that came out of Shelby's workshop had different tuning setups, and also the speed and the acceleration was highly dependent on the skills and the cojones that the driver possessed. But according to my book here, a ballpark average top speed would be 160 miles per hour or 257 kilometers per hour. Pretty fast. But the 0 to 60 is pretty staggering. It's 4.6 seconds. That is quick today. Think about how fast this must have been in 1965 when it came out. Oh boy. But even though it was a performer, it was a real handful to drive. And there is an interesting story about this. Now this story comes from Bill Cosby. Anyways, Bill Cosby, for those of you who don't know, he was a comedian in the 80s. He was famous for being on a sitcom in the 80s, and he was a comedian before that. But now he's hated, and I'm not going to be telling you the reason he's hated, and I don't want to discuss this any further because I'm not that controversial. Anyways, the story goes that in 1967, Bill Cosby was friends with Carroll Shelby, and he bought a Shelby Cobra Super Snake CSX 3303. Now this was a competition version of the car, basically built for racing, and it had 2 superchargers and it had a different gearbox. Only 2 such cars were built. Now, reportedly, the car scared Bill Cosby so much that he returned it the very next day. Reportedly, the car was sold to SNC Motors in San Francisco, who in turn sold it to a customer by the name of Tony Maxey. Now, Maxey ended up wrecking the CSX by accidentally driving over a cliff and into the Pacific Ocean. And yes, he did die from his injuries a few days later. Now, someone else purchased the vehicle and restored it, and he planned to auction the car off. This story is reportedly true, and it goes to show you how temperamental the nature of the Cobra was. I'm not going to make the video boring by explaining exactly why the car was so difficult to drive, but just all you need to know was that there was too much horsepower going to the rear wheels and the car was really light, so you would be spinning out if you stabbed the throttle too hard. Anyways, continuing on. Unfortunately, the Shelby Cobra in its original run had a short shelf life. In fact, its popularity began to wane in the late 1960s because, frankly, its design was becoming a bit old-fashioned, and there were newer, all-round sports cars like the Lotus Elan that were coming out in showrooms at the time. Contrary to popular belief, the Shelby Cobra was actually a sales flop. Actual production numbers are widely disputed, however, most people estimate that less than 1,000 were made, and they fetch millions on the auction block when and if they go on sale. So, if you see one casually parked on the street, or if you know a guy who owns one, 9.5 times out of 10, it's a replica. Usually sold in kit form with donor parts from other cars, which you can actually buy from companies like Factory 5, who I think has the most famous kit available for replica Cobra builders. However, I'm not discounting those replicas or those kit cars. In fact, I believe that they're actually continuing the legacy of Carroll Shelby. They're continuing the legacy that he laid down all those years ago, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. In fact, I believe that the originals can technically be called kit cars, and here's why. A kit car is essentially a car that is built from different parts, usually from donor cars or provided from a factory that manufactures those parts and sends them to a workshop to be built in-house. The Shelby Cobra fits into this description because the body comes from AC Cars, the engine comes from Ford, and the suspension components are built in-house. So yeah, it's technically a kit car. It's just being assembled by Shelby and assembled and tuned by Shelby and sold to the general public. And I believe that the kit replicas that are being sold nowadays continue that legacy, like I said before. The fact that replica Cobras have outsold the original by far is a testament to what Carroll Shelby had built and the long-lasting legacy it has. In fact, the Shelby/AC Cobra, which I should have been calling it the AC Cobra this whole time, the AC Shelby Cobra set a precedent and a benchmark for American performance cars. It was the proto muscle car, not because it looked like it was fashioned after a flexed bicep, but it was the original muscle car. It came out long before the Camaro, actually quite a few years before the Chevrolet Camaro came out in 1968 to set the definition of the muscle car for real. And it wasn't even American. It came out of a small sports car manufacturer in England by the name of AC Cars. Now, AC Cars has been floundering financially ever since its inception, but they've come back in 2020 and they're actually offering 3 new variants of the AC Cobra. Really awesome, and it comes with 3 powertrain options. One comes with the LSA GM 6.2 liter V8. Another one comes with the Ford EcoBoost engine if you are a fuel-conscious motorist, and of course there is an electric version because everything is becoming electric nowadays. I think it's a really cool thing, and I'm gonna link the article that reported the fact that AC was bringing these cars back. However, the prices are quite high, as if I remember correctly, the prices start at 129,500 pounds. Boy, that's expensive. Whew. Anyways, with that being said, this wraps up the video. I know it's a bit longer than my usual videos, but I hope you've enjoyed it nonetheless. This is Lassika from CeeDrawsCars, and I wish you all a happy 2021, and I hope your year turns out a lot better than last year was, to be honest. And I hope you have a great week ahead of you. Goodbye and cheers.